How to draw a color pencil realistic Labrador. You can download the reference image down below in the description. To start out with, you want to make sure you're drawing an outline for the eye. You can use black or a dark color. And then you have to fill in the eyes with some sort of color that matches that dog's eye. So this one had a little bit of green and a little bit of brown tones in it. Make sure that you're leaving room for the highlights that are shown reflecting in the eye. Because you can't draw white on top of dark, this is why I leave room for those highlights. I then start out with a first layer using a very light pale color. You want to use light colors to begin with and draw in the same direction as the fur that you see. That's super important, that way that texture is in the same similar direction. As I build up my layers, I start to apply other colors and make sure that it all is blended by using a burnishing method, which is using a white or very light pencil and applying a nice heavy waxy coating over all of it. You'll see that the tooth of the paper doesn't go through nearly as much when you do this method. As I continue, I apply a little bit more color. You can see that there's a little bit of some blue tones and a little bit of some gold tones. So I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing those in the highlighted areas as well as closer to the darker, more shaded areas. The midtones have a little bit of this nice light blonde color, so I'm applying a little bit of that throughout the whole drawing. And then of course, repeat the same steps. It is a similar method where you just apply lighter colors for the first couple layers, start to build up those layers and make sure you're drawing in the same direction. Alternate your pencils so that you have a variety of colors. The more colors you add, the more depth you will be able to visually see. And in some of the parts of the body, the colors change depending on the lighting, where the angle of the light is shown. That is why I applied more of a blonde color for the first layer here, because you can see that the lighting does come in more here and reflects that nice blonde golden color from the fur. Make sure to leave room for some of the key features, such as the highlights or little folds in the ruffles of the fur. That way you can get a different color in there and then blend it in with the rest of it, as you can see in this top right hand corner. It's also important to make sure that your pencil is very nice and sharp when it comes to applying detail. I always tell my students, when the first few layers, when you start to apply those, it doesn't matter if it's sharp or not, as long as you're drawing in the same direction. But then as you start to add your details, which will be later on after quite a few layers, then you want to make sure that your pencil is very nice and sharp. You can also apply a little bit of a sagey green color. This really helps to reflect a nice natural tone in the environment that the animal was originally in when the picture was taken. So just continue the same steps and make sure that you're curving in the right directions too. Fur is usually not stagnant. It has a nice flow and nice angles to it, so pay attention to the flow of the fur. And then make sure you have that white pencil handy so that you can burnish some of those areas, make it nice and smooth, because later on you can apply more details after you've done so. And the blue is applied more in the highlighted areas. And try to avoid applying blue in the darker areas. You tend to see more of blue tones in highlights than in darker areas. But once again, you have to play around and play with colors just to see what works and what doesn't work. And I've noticed that blue just tends to work more in the highlights. And then applying a little bit of more colors in the midtones and in the low light areas. If you haven't noticed yet, I haven't really used a natural brown all too much. I've actually used more orange and green and blue tones, but it is important to also implement some brown in there. So I am going to apply it in some of these more shaded areas, as you can see, and then also just to add some detail around in some of the mid-tone areas too. If you're feeling intimidated at this point, it's okay to be intimidated. I've been doing this for quite a few years and I've practiced pretty much every single day. So if you just learn from these tips and tricks and then practice them on your own, I would say about maybe once a day, or probably 3 or 4 times a week, you'll really be able to advance pretty quickly. That's why in my actual classes, I make sure that every single step is being shown, as well as the type of colors, because it's really important to be able to understand in detail and not have any confusion. So as you can see with the ear here, it's very similar to the rest of the body. There is a darker spot where the curve is, so you want to make sure you're using at least a dark sepia, if not a little bit of black. I try to avoid using black as much as possible because it's a very flat color. So if you can use dark tones first before you use black, that is much better to do so. But as you can see a little bit of the texture of the fur. I was able to apply a little bit of some darker browns and then apply a little bit of some red tones using a burnt sienna. There are other tools too, such as the slice tool, which you just saw here a second ago, that gives a nice sharp edge to some of these highlighted areas. It just etches away some of the details. All that information is in my classes as well as in the links below. But now we can continue on to the cheek. We're almost done here. So this part is pretty dark. So I'm using a dark sepia just to apply kind of more of where the darker areas going into the midtones are. And then I start to use just lighter colors to blend in with the rest of it and make sure that it is warmed up enough too. You don't want it to be too much of a cool tone. Cool tones are blues, purples, and greens. And warm tones are reds, orange, and yellow. I usually like to finish each section first before I continue on, but sometimes I don't quite finish it just yet. That way I can kind of understand the proportions and where the key features such as the highlights and lowlights really are supposed to be. So I also like to use a very pale pink if it has more of a warm tone to the animal. I like to use a pale pink instead of just a white because white can cool it down a little bit too much. So if you have a very pale pink, you can use that as well. But really it's just a matter of getting in that texture, the direction of the fur, and then building up all those layers and making sure that it all looks nice and smooth ultimately. And then you can start to add a little bit more of some texture of the fur closer towards the end of the process. Now I'm also applying a little bit of brown here, and I'm making sure that it is in the right areas. As you can see, there's a little bit of a separation between the muzzle and the cheek here, but I will start to blend that a little bit better together here in just a few seconds. Don't forget to keep your pencil nice and sharp for the details, and of course leave room for some of those highlights. And you can use this light blue or a white color just to kind of blend the highlights into the midtones. And if you see that there is a section that's a little bit off, go ahead and just apply some more colors. It doesn't hurt to apply more layers, so long as you're not damaging the paper over time. But if you're using a light enough pressure, it shouldn't be too bad. This size was done in a 4x4 size, so it's very small. Sometimes the smaller, the harder it gets. But having a small size is nice because you can accomplish it a lot faster. Now I'm using a mineral spirit oil with a paintbrush, which I also talk about in one of my ebooks with the materials. Now let's move on to the nose here. And it has a lot of different colors. You can see there's a little bit of purple in there, a little bit of pink. And then I use some blue in the highlights and then a dark sepia just to add some brown and some nice warm tones rather than a black color. Then I start to kind of get it blended together. Now, of course, the nose has a lot of texture to it, but I'm going to blend it all. And then I'm going to apply some highlights of my own using the white color. And then get that nice dark fur kind of blending from the nose out to the muzzle there. And now the very last step is the end of the mouth here. So of course I'm going to use darker pencil to apply some of the nice textures and make sure that you see the separation between the bottom of the mouth to the top of the mouth there. And we're just about done here. I really hope that this video was helpful. Don't forget the little dots of the whiskers too. That's super important for the details. If you found this video really helpful, please give it a like and comment down below if you have any questions. And check out the description for my ebooks where you can where I have a full materials list as well as several other memberships and programs where you can learn to draw. And the last step, which you don't always have to do for pet portraits, but I'm adding a little bit of a shadow because it's laying down. Wanted to show that it's laying down on some sort of surface. So this is actually really difficult and I don't always like doing it, but all you have to do is just make sure you're blending all of the colors really, really nice and smooth. So it's quite a process. But thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.